Hey friends, this is Marley from Wild by Nature and welcome to part one of the Nature Connection as a Way of Life series. As you can hear, there's nature all around making a bit of noise here in my backyard in Tice Hill, Newcastle. We've got some noisy Indian miners there, not natives, but they definitely do well in any environment. This week we're going to be focusing on the energy of the east and the sunrise, and that's the welcome and the greetings and the innocence of the child mind, and we're going to explore that as a theme. We're also going to be looking at nature connection as a model to get a bit of an understanding of what deep nature connection is and how we see our place in it, and we'll have some take-home practices and maybe even a little story. So welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that these teachings have come to me from many different lines, many different ancestral and modern lines, many different teachers. In particular, I want to give a big shout out to John Young and the Eight Shields organization, mentored by Tom Brown Jr., and then along with a great number of nature connection enthusiasts and researchers and indigenous elders across the globe. They've mapped out some amazing practices and teachings, and they've inspired this. Also to Bill Plotkin and the Animus Valley and the work they're doing there to look at the development of the human from a soul-centric or ecocentric perspective, Nature and the Human Soul, amazing book. And I could go on and on with all the people that have taught me, but I just want to give a big thank you to those people. I also want to acknowledge that I'm sitting here on an earth that still has some wild nature amongst it in different pockets, thanks to the keepers of this land, all the way back when it was the trees and the animals only, and then the first humans that came here, the Awabagal people of this area, and then onto those modern day elders or more recent elders who still cared for and looked after this place and still do. So thank you to those, and thank you to those who will come after them, and particularly thank you to the trees, the birds, the bees, and all the animals that still maintain a sense of wildness even here in the city. As you'll see, the camera's shaking a little bit with a westerly wind. It was a great day. It's a great day to be working with this theme. I was greeted with an amazing sun and got to spend the morning in the surf, and I was feeling very welcomed indeed. So just before we start, I just wanted to mention an overview of the course. This week we will, as I said, focus on the East, welcome, orienting, and inspiring. Next week we'll focus on play, motivation and movement. Week 3, focus, challenge, the energy of fire and perspiration, and week 4, the embodied sense of relaxing and internalizing into nature. Nature. What is nature? I think that's an awesome place to start, because a lot of us, at least in the modern day, have started to create a separation, and the idea that nature is something out there that I go and do or experience, maybe when I go for a bushwalk or on a holiday to a particular destination. And I think we've forgotten that nature is always here. It's always here, and it's here. And one way to visualize that sense that we are part of nature is, of course, the web of life. I don't know if you can see the lines here, but I think that's an important or valuable way to picture ourselves, even if we don't get a full-felt sense of it yet, is that there's a web of life and we are an integral and very welcome and necessary and wanted part of that web, and that we can trust that it's there. Now, the purpose of the deep nature connection work is to start to bring more and more awareness into these threads of connection that we have with our inner and outer wild nature, because that awareness and the practices that go along with it are what creates an ecocentric or expanded sense of self, that we are part of nature. And it's not a switch, and I believe, at least in my own life, that felt sense of deep nature connection, it comes and goes, or it runs along a continuum. So we're hoping we can bring some practices to you that will help expand that sense of deep nature connection, or maybe even spiral it down both ways. But the purpose of the spiral is to see us as this unique individual that's part of this web. We're an important node, and the more threads we have, the more we can spiral outwards or inwards, like a spider builds a web. So deep nature connection is the felt sense of being part of this web from this perspective. And we believe that deep nature connection as a felt sense brings fruits to our life. And the 5 that I like to focus on are awareness, a sense of belonging, a sense of empowerment, a sense of playfulness, and a sense of purpose. So hopefully we start to cultivate those. Another useful model is that used by the 8 Shield, and slightly modified, and that's the idea that if we are indeed part of the web of life, then how do we bring awareness to that? Well, the first 2 things we're going to need is some sense of connected village culture, something that holds us and mentors us at the human level. And alongside that, we're going to need some sense of wild nature. The 2 combined act as mentors or guides that help bring us into deep nature connection. And one way is through the pathway of the core routines. Now we'll talk more about these later, but just understand that there are a set of core routines that have been mapped to a lot of connected groups, past and present, particularly Indigenous groups or First Nations groups. We're still practicing connected culture, and they've been researched and mapped by the 8 Shields organisation, and a useful place to start. The second thing we're going to look at is the way that these core routines develop mind states of connection. I guess they're more like a temporary mind state that would be linked to being in a place of nature connection. And that over time, the more we cultivate those, the more we develop these attributes or qualities of a deeply connected human. And so we become, or better not become, I would say we surrender or fall into this amazing human that we were born into. So it's a good place to ask ourselves a question, and ask ourselves the question, well, what is it that I hope to get from these nature connection practices or this course? What is it I hope to bring into my life? Now, if we're working with the energy of the East, and we're going to go through 4 energies in this series: the East, the Northeast, so East in the morning, Northeast mid-morning, the North in midday, and the Northwest. But this week we're focusing on the East, and there will be in the learning notes this diagram, which is a useful guide when trying to understand what we're talking about with the directions. But maybe we'll talk about that a bit more in some of the future, some of the upcoming modules. But today let's just stay with the East, because that's what we were practicing yesterday with an amazing group in Gregson Park. Thank you to all those who came. And that's what we're going to encourage you to explore in your own backyard or with your own community. So the East, as we said, is about welcome. It's about feeling welcomed. And there's a great story in Bill Plotkin's book there that a friend told him who'd spent time with the Tuareg in Africa. And the story goes that the mother, when pregnant, goes to a special birthing place to give birth by herself. And then she returns to the village and stays in a special space where only the other mothers and aunties and grandmothers of the village look after her for a week. And then she emerges with the baby and presents it to the 4 directions and the whole village. And as she does so, they just shower it with welcome and praise. And so the baby comes into the world feeling like it belongs, that it's part of it. Essential ingredient in any nature connection model. So let's explore that possibility through some activities. and also the child's mind that follows. But before we do, maybe another story. This one a mythical story. This is a story that's come to me through Michael Mead, and it is an Indian myth. I think it's very apt. So in this story, there is the time before time. And in that time, the great Lord Vishnu, sitting upon a lotus leaf, or a lotus flower, floating in the great cosmological abyss of nothingness, dreams. He sleeps and he dreams. And in that dream, he starts to imagine something wonderful, something so beautiful that it must take form. And from there, a universe is imagined, full of stars and solar systems. And in one of those solar systems is a special place. For the sake of this story, let's say it's our Earth. And on that planet, he creates endless forms, most beautiful. And the Earth becomes covered with water, land, plants and trees, and the animals that inhabit, seas, the land, the trees and the skies. Beautiful, perfect balance. And then Vishnu dreams up one more character. And in this story, that character's name is Markandeya. The first of the humans, the first of the wanderers, the first of the explorers of this earth. And Markandeya is born into this earth in perfect innocence, welcomed by all the creatures, the land, the seas, the weather, the sun, the skies, the stars, the moon, all of them welcoming him. And he begins to explore. And as he explores in his perfect childlike innocence, he beholds the earth and all its beings as kin, but more than kin, as part of himself. And with all of his senses expanded, activated, open and aware, he moves around in childlike reverence. And we'll return to that story, because of course all stories have conflict and none has happened yet, but let's just stay with that period, that childlike innocence period, because that's what we're going to use as we explore the first of our core routines a little more deeply. So it was an invitation in the orientation video that we find a sit spot to sit in, and so we're going to revisit that, because the sit spot is the corest of the core routines. The sit spot is kind of like the silver bullet of deep nature connection. And if not the sit spot, it's the energy or spirit of the sit spot, so an activity that has something similar. What is a sit spot? A sit spot is essentially finding a place that feels very welcoming, hopefully close by to your home. Within 3 to 5 minutes would be wonderful, so that you can access it every day for 5, 10, 15, 20, 40, an hour. And when we go there, we can use the teachings of the child, particularly the newborn, as a way to begin. So yesterday we were blessed with a newborn child who was exploring all of nature in such magical wonderment. And it was pointed out that there is our great teacher, which is true. I agree. But maybe we don't all have a newborn baby in our midst. But maybe we can start to tap in or remember what it felt like. And so here is the invitation and the first of the activities that we're going to encourage. And that is to switch on our childlike awareness. Before we go to our sit spot, before we do one of those activities, we're just going to get used to cultivating or starting to build up our muscle of awareness. And one way we could do that is to choose a trigger. Maybe it's a particular bird call or a particular sound or thing that we will hear, see, notice throughout our day, at least a couple of times a day. And when we hear that trigger, what we want to do is pause, soften our eyes, soften our body, maybe take a breath to help. And just take a few moments, or as long as you need, to become aware of what's around us. The shapes, the colours, the objects, the light, the sounds, the smells. Without identifying them or naming them or giving them a story, just taking note. And the question we might ask is, I wonder what I'm missing. Because if we trigger ourselves throughout our day, we'll start to notice that in all our environments, there's so much going on. And often, if we're anywhere near the outside world, we'll at least have some form of wild nature to witness, including the felt sense in our body. So that's activity 1. Activity 2 is the welcome activity. So yesterday we did a greetings game where all of the people got together and they would have a different greeting. A greeting that would make the others feel welcome in the group. Now the invitation at home is to explore welcome and greetings in your own backyard, not just with the human community, but with the more than human community. So if we're going to start to build some ropes of connection to our environment, to the beings in our backyard, then the least we can do is greet them. Now you may have a name for them, you may not, it's not important. You may or may not know what they are from a scientific perspective. That's not so important either. Let's just be more like in the child's mind and notice that there are beautiful trees with little leaves and flowers popping up at spring come. Morning. We've got birds that wake us up in the morning. Greetings. The grass, the sun, the sky, the wind, anything that we notice throughout our day, the encouragement or invitation is just to start to greet it. Even if it's just a couple of things that you notice to and from your way to work or school, or if you go surfing like I do, and greet the water and the dolphins and the beings there. So that's the second activity I'd like to try and explore, to get that sense of connection through welcoming them, particularly in the morning. The third is the sit spot. So if we've started to build our sensory awareness and we've started to develop our ability to welcome and greet the beings around us, that's an excellent energy to take into our sit spot. So, if you have a chance, I strongly encourage you to tune into your body and to try and find a place in your backyard land or nearby that feels welcoming. One where you can feel like you're resting like a newborn child into the earth, maybe leaning against a tree or on the ground, or somewhere that feels good. Maybe you're up a tree, maybe you're in the water. Like me, sometimes the ocean, surfing is my sit spot. It doesn't have to be perfect wild nature. The perfect sit spot is one we can get to without too much hassle. So like I said before, 3 to 5 minutes to get there. At least having some trees, maybe some water. There's going to be some birds, there might be some cars, there might be some buildings. Now if we can go there with our childlike wonder, we're not going to judge or give stories to what we see, to the sounds. All I'm encouraging us to do this week is to go to the sit spot and just tune into that childlike mind. And just let whatever's there land on our senses. Relaxed eyes, taking in as much as we can. Relaxed ears, 360-degree hearing. Relaxed body, feeling the wind or the sun, the temperature, anything that lands on it. The smells. And just be childlike wonder, presence even. Spend some time there. See what comes up. I wonder who you will meet there. There's the question. I wonder who you will meet and what relationships you'll build. And the other side of the sit spot, and this is really important, this is where inspiration builds. And inspiration is a very important part of the East energy, of the sunrise energy. And so the inspiration comes from sharing stories. Absolutely critical to fostering deep nature connection is that we have an experience with some sense of wild nature, within or without, and we get to share that. Now when we share it, we have to be careful where we choose, because of course we don't want to be putting our seeds or our in rocky soil. We want to find humans who are fertile soil, who will catch our stories like seeds and will help them grow. And those are the sorts of humans who are good listeners, who are genuinely curious, who almost embody the energy of like grandma or grandpa to the kid who comes to tell them the story. So if you can find at least one human to share that with, great. If you can't find a human to share that with, share it with a journal. And there will also be a Facebook group for this course, where I'm going to encourage you to perhaps share a sit spot story. You might have an object, or if you need to, a photo, and then you could post that and tell us something about one of your stories. I would love to hear a few sit spot stories from home. Now after someone shares, the invitation is to ask questions of curiosity, just like we would with a child. So trying to get more detail, particularly this time sensory detail. What were some of the smells? What were the colours? What was the feeling? What did you hear? And start to put that together so people's experience, their sensory experience, deepens and grows. That's the job of the mentor. That's the importance of the connected village, is that there's someone to receive us and to bring more out, to mentor more of that experience out of us, so those threads, the awareness gets stronger and stronger each time. So those are the three activities. The awareness activity, sound, switch on, full sensory awareness, no story, just witnessing. Second one, the greeting and the welcoming of beings and humans. The energy of the sunrise. Can you embody the energy of the sunrise and the east? Don't always have to be happy, but it's worth a shot to see if we can bring that in, particularly when the sun is shining on a morning like today. And the third one is to find a sit spot and then to share your story. So if we can start to explore those this week, we're going to start to work with the energy of the east. You might even find yourself out there early morning witnessing a sunrise and start to actually feel what is it like, and cultivate that welcome, inspiration, and ideally this will lead to a sense of happiness. That's the attribute that we're trying to develop with the east energy, and we'll talk more about that in next week. Next week we're going to focus on the northeast, on movement, energy and play, and as child to move and explore. And we're also going to explore in more depth the core routines, mind states of connection, and attributes of a connected human. All the sound, no judgment. So thank you for tuning in and listening. I hope that you got something out of this week. If you have questions or curious, please feel free to contact me. I would love to see any or all of you next week at Gregson Park on Tuesday. And just in case you haven't done it yet, please email if you're interested in getting the notes that go along with each week's module, that you can reread them, and they've got the take-home practices, and they're a great place. It's a great way to stay up to date with what's happening. And so we will finish with a big thank you to all that is, and catch you next week. I hope